that almost no one tonight among you will be persuaded to change your mind. If you believe the kind of things that Joe believes, you won't be persuaded by me. If you already believe the perfectly sensible and commonsensible things that I'm going to say, then you won't be persuaded by him. And this is something that we should think about, because it's a very strange thing. What it suggests is that what this has to do with is in fact not so much belief in the sense of thinking about what is true. Rather, what it has to do with is some deep emotional commitments that relate to individual temperaments, and that people like Hume, like Lucretius, like Xenophanes, or like myself, may well be freaks of nature, in that our minds somehow are able to function without that assumption. So now, this, I think, requires one more preamble. The preamble is that science and religion have the same fundamental psychological roots. The root of science and religion is simply the human capacity to wonder about the explanations of visible things in terms of invisible things. And that, I think, is, in a sense, the mark of the beginning of science. It's also the mark of the beginning of religion. Those two things at the beginning are the same, because no animal wonders about the unseen cause of what that animal can perceive. Only humans worry about this. Now, some humans worry about it and immediately conclude that they've got the answer. And those are the religions of the world. And it's not surprising, of course, that there is indeed one thing that all religions get right. And that is that all the other religions are complete rubbish.
Yes.
But we, on the other side, have found another way to wonder about the explanations, the unseen explanations for what is seen, and that is the very laborious and very counterintuitive and very difficult and very hesitant method called scientific method. And most of you here, whether you're Christian or not, believe in the scientific method to the extent that you will not look to the Bible for a blueprint if you want to get a rocket to Mars, and you will not look to the Bible for a blueprint if you want to know which is the safer plane or car to fly. Okay? So we all believe in science, and we all know that science is not absolutely infallible. That's the whole point. Only religions are absolutely infallible. Only religions are absolutely certain. And as Bertrand Russell once observed, most of the evil in the world has been done by people who were absolutely certain of something that turned out to be false. Now, I'm very confused about which God we're talking about here, and whenever I debate this, I am plunged into further confusion because, of course, in one sense, I would be perfectly happy to say that God exists if by God you mean mathematics, or if by God you mean there was something that caused the universe to exist rather than not. But that has nothing to do whatsoever with the kind of God that most believers in the religions of the world worship. Indeed, it would be absurd to worship the author of the universe, if by that you simply mean whatever forces it was that got the universe to exist. Because whatever force that force obviously doesn't care about us. It is not going to be interested in our prayers. Now, there are a number of traditional proofs for the existence of God, which most Christians admit aren't any good. But nevertheless, they're there, and I think what's interesting about them is that they can actually be turned on their head. One of the most beautiful ones is the ontological proof that essentially says it's part of the meaning of God that God exists, so God can't not exist. There you are, end of proof. That's the ontological proof. Okay? Well, I think that the premise here, which is God is the being than which no greater can be conceived, can be slightly improved upon, or rather, the conclusion can be improved upon, because surely, if you compare two gods, one that is so powerful and exists, and another one that doesn't even have to exist to be that powerful, the second one is obviously the greater. The first one depends on existence to have this power. The second one doesn't even have to exist. Therefore, if you're really a theologian, you should believe that God is indeed great because he doesn't even need to exist. Nor does he. And he doesn't need to exist for all the things that are attributed to God to exist and to be intelligible. And I think that's the important thing about that proof. Now, as for the cosmological proof, I think that what's interesting about it, and the reason it gets turned on its head, is that it essentially says nothing can exist without a cause. So therefore, there must be a cause. Well, first of all, that's a complete absurdity. If you just said nothing could exist without a cause, then how come your conclusion is therefore there must be a cause? Right? So that argument in itself is absurd, but what people mean by it is that they mean that something as complex as the world must have been caused by something more complex. And the interesting thing about this is that it's simply not true. Everything that we know around us, everything that science knows about the natural world, shows that complex things come out of simple things. Unicellular organisms, which are still the most successful and the most numerous in the world today. There's more unicellular organisms, not only in numbers, but by weight than everything else put together that's alive. Right? Unicellular organisms are the simplest forms of complex life, and we are more complex, and we have evolved out of them. And quite generally, complicated things evolve out of simple ones, whether this be in technology or in evolution. Consequently, if there had been a God to create the world, that God would himself or itself have to have come out of a process of evolution from the simple to the complex. Okay, so now I want to move to another fundamental principle that I think lies in the way of atheists and theists understanding each other. And that is this idea, which I think many people express, sometimes they express it even when they don't really believe it, that everything in life has a meaning. Everything has a purpose. No hair of the head is uncounted. That kind of view. Now, I think what's interesting about this is that it is actually a logical impossibility. And it's easy to see why. If you do just one thing, let's say I just take this and I wave it around. I have done this one thing, yes, but I've also done, in the sense that this one thing had consequences which are innumerable, perhaps infinite, in terms of disturbance of air.